Hello, Victorianists. I wanted to talk to you briefly about our research paper as we get started. I realize this is a lot of reading in our Victorian class, but I want to organize this paper slowly so you do one piece at a time and it doesn't seem like such a burden on top of the rest of the reading for the class. So I'm asking you to choose a work of literature to focus on. And I'm asking you to analyze it using cultural criticism, which is basically looking at facts of history and culture, anything from the poor laws to women's fashions. Psychoanalytic criticism, looking at psychology, madness, depression, anything like that. Marxist criticism, which deals either with where the money goes and who gets it, or with class, or both of those things, or post-colonial criticism. And you'll notice that I'm not including feminist criticism or gender criticism here. And I'm doing that on purpose because what I found in looking at the kinds of criticism that we're having you do in many of your other classes, feminist criticism and gender criticism is a favorite. And so I'm asking you to switch over to some of the kinds of criticism that maybe are not as familiar to you. But the first thing you're going to do in this project is not to think about criticism at all. I've laid out the different parts of the assignment here, but first of all, and most important, and this week, I'm going to ask you to think about the work of literature you're going to talk about. So I've broken down the possibilities into different sort of genres. And I'm asking you to read something that you're not already familiar with. And so even though I think I would place Picture of Dorian Gray in the Gothic genre, several of you already said that you know that novel and love that novel. So I'm asking you not to choose that for your research project. Instead, think about one of these. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Bram Stoker's Dracula, classic vampire novel, Green Tea and Other Really Spooky Stories by Sheridan Le Fanu, an Irish Victorian writer. Again, short stories are fine. You probably would have to do more than one to make a whole paper. But he's wonderfully spooky and easy to access. Elizabeth Gaskell wrote several kind of Gothic tales. Robert Louis Stevenson, probably better known for Treasure Island, wrote a long novella, I guess I would say, called The Body Snatchers, which is would certainly be Gothic. M.R. James wrote a series of ghost stories. He produced a different ghost story every Christmas and invited his friends to his house on Christmas Eve to hear the new story. So there's one of these called Lost Hearts that would be Gothic. Henry James' Turn of the Screw, which is a really, really scary novel, also a short novel. Lady Audley's Secret, a classic sensation novel. Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone is a great mystery novel, and important mystery writers like Dorothy Sayers point to The Moonstone as perhaps the most perfect detective story in England. It involves a gem taken from India and three Indian priests who come to England looking to get it back. The Woman in White is a legal thriller, and Rider Haggard has some novels of empire. She, about this fantastic Indian African queen who marshals a whole empire of slaves, and King Solomon's Mines, which is about searching for gold in Africa. But maybe you prefer realistic fiction, and if that's the case, consider working on one of these. Dickens' David Copperfield has a host of memorable characters that every English major should know about. Hard Times is a shorter novel. It deals, but it's very depressing, I guess I would say. Deals with the effect of utilitarianism and industrialism on education. Dombey and Son is a critique of foreign investment, foreign trade. Sybil is a class novel of the 1840s. Interestingly, the author, Benjamin Disraeli, was a British Prime Minister, but he was also a best-selling novelist. George Eliot, the pen name of Marianne Evans, wrote a number of great novels. Her best-known one is certainly Middlemarch, but some of her novels are shorter. Mill on the Floss or Silas Marner are shorter. Daniel Deronda is a long novel, but it deals with anti-Semitism in British culture. Elizabeth Gaskell, the short story writer previously mentioned, also wrote great novels, Mary Barton and North and South, both of which are interesting if you're interested in the Marxist perspective, who has wealth and what class are they. I would recommend Elizabeth Gaskell for that. Thackeray's novel Vanity Fair has an Indian connection. Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd, The Mayor of Casterbridge, or Jude the Obscure are all dealing with characters who traverse from one class to another and have difficulties along the way. So if you're interested in Marxism and classism, certainly one of those would be a good choice. Stevenson's The Beach at Falesa is really a long short story. It's not all that long. It is one of the options. I say it's optional in our unit on imperialism, so I'm not saying you have to read it then, but it's an interesting take on a British trader who goes out to the Pacific Islands. Olive Schreiner's The Story of an African Farm is often considered to be the first new woman novel. Schreiner herself was South African, born in South Africa, and she writes about the plight of women and the struggle for women's education. Trollope's The Newcomes is kind of a dynastic novel that has an imperialist flavor as well. However, if poetry is more to your taste, there are some meaty poems that you might want to take a look at, and those include Elizabeth Barrett Browning's Aurora Leigh. Now, this is a long poem. I think it's 10 or 11 books. They're called books. And it's in blank verse. So I'll warn you, that one's long, but it is the story of how Aurora becomes a famous poet and what she has to give up in order to practice her art. Arnold's The Scholar Gypsy is a longish poem that might be interesting. Tennyson's Locksley Hall or Idylls of the King. If you happen to be in Dr. Sepek's Arthurian class, Idylls of the King is probably a work you're reading in that class. So that might be something you want to combine a little bit. Browning's longish dramatic monologues, The Bishop Orders His Tomb, Andrea del Sarto, or Caliban upon Setebos. I don't think we're doing any of those in this class, but any one of the three, they're long enough dramatic monologues that you could easily do a whole paper on them. Wilde wrote a poem, perhaps one of his best known, from his time incarcerated for homosexuality in Reading Jail, the Ballad of Reading Jail. And Gerard Manley Hopkins, the Jesuit poet, wrote religious poetry, what are known as the Terrible Sonnets. That's the critical name for them. They were not published as that, but they're sonnets where he's really pleading to God to help him out of this terrible depression he's facing. So if your interest is in psychoanalytic mental health, then Gerard Manley Hopkins might be the person you want to work on. Children's literature, of course, is an important genre in Victorian literature. Many people call it the golden age of children's literature. Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island or Kidnapped. I would particularly recommend Kipling's novel Kim, which is about a young boy born in India. He's a British orphan, but he's raised as an Indian child, and he goes on an important spy mission for the British Army. But it's an interesting look at crossing of cultures, and it's a fun read too, with some crazy characters. Kingsley's The Water Babies is a very interesting novel about chimney sweeps. That's all I'll say about that. You have to read it. That, in comparison with William Blake's novels about chimney sweepers, would make a very interesting paper. All right, fantasy and science fiction. Samuel Butler's Erewhon, George MacDonald's Phantastes or Lilith, and H.G. Wells' The Time Machine or The Island of Dr. Moreau. Samuel Butler's Erewhon, it's nowhere spelled backwards. It's a utopian novel. George MacDonald is considered the father of modern fantasy. He influenced both Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And Wells's science fiction, again, rivals Jules Verne, the French science fiction writer, at the same time, more or less. Verne was first, but H.G. Wells put a British spin on science fiction, so any of those would be fair game for your work. All right, so the first thing I want you to do this week is to pick a work that you're going to look at and to read as much of it as you can, so you have an idea of some themes that you might want to pick out or which type of criticism you want to do. Next week, I want you to send in a proposal that gives a paragraph focusing on what you plan to explore in your literary work and citations for 3 general articles about Victorian literature or culture that are not necessarily specifically about your work. I know that's a very odd thing to ask for, so I'm saying I want you to, if you're going to use Marxist criticism about class or who's got the money, then I want you to find 3 general articles about money or class in the Victorian era, or in Victorian literature in general. If you're interested in psychoanalysis, I want you to find 3 articles about Victorian mental illness or something like that. If you're interested in post-colonial criticism, I want you to find 3 articles about British colonialism and how that may have influenced literature. And I'm presenting you with specific library sources. All of these are from the Fairmont State Library. And most of them are collections of essays. And so you're going to go into these books